Did you know that ancient Egypt's queens wielded immense power beyond the shadow of the pharaohs? Join me as we unveil the untold stories of these remarkable women and their surprising impact on Egyptian history. Everyone talks about the pharaohs, the god-kings, the warriors, the builders. But what if I told you that right beside them, or sometimes right behind the throne, were queens who held just as much power, and sometimes more? This isn't about Cleopatra. You've heard that name 100 times. This is about the queens whose names you haven't heard, the ones left in the margins of dusty scrolls and broken temple walls, the ones who pulled the strings of an empire that lasted over 3,000 years. Today, we're diving deep into the forgotten world of ancient Egypt's queens. You're going to see them not just as wives or mothers, but as regents, diplomats, high priestesses, and even de facto rulers. Their lives were filled with political intrigue, power struggles, and strategic brilliance that shaped the course of Egyptian history. Let's start with the obvious. When most people picture ancient Egypt, they think of golden masks, massive pyramids, and of course, the male pharaohs, Tutankhamun, Ramses, and Akhenaten. They were the faces of the kingdom, the living gods. But behind that glimmering image, queens were playing critical roles, often in silence, often erased. In Egyptian society, queens weren't just consorts. They were often daughters of kings, wives of kings, and mothers of future kings. They were raised in the heart of palace politics. They understood power because they were born into it. But the stories that survive mostly focus on the men. Why? Because history is written by those who win wars, commission monuments, and get remembered in stone. And often, those were the men. But the women, the queens, they were behind those victories. They were managing the kingdom while the kings went to war. They were choosing alliances, brokering peace, raising heirs, and sometimes seizing power themselves. So let's pull back the curtain and meet some of these women. One of the most common roles queens played was that of regent. When a king died and his successor was too young to rule, the queen, usually his wife or mother, would step in as regent. She wasn't a placeholder. She was in charge. Take Queen Ahotep, for example. She lived during a time of war and upheaval, when Egypt was under threat from the Hyksos invaders. After her husband, Pharaoh Seqenenretau, died in battle, Ahotep took control. Her son, Ahmose I, was still a child, so she ruled in his place. And she didn't just sit in the palace twiddling her thumbs. She organized the military, held the government together, and even crushed a rebellion in Upper Egypt. Later, when Ahmose came of age and became pharaoh, he gave her full credit. Inscriptions praise her for keeping Egypt united and strong. Without her, Egypt might have fallen. Then there's Queen Taye, the wife of Amenhotep III, and mother of the revolutionary Akhenaten. Taye wasn't a regent, but she was an advisor with extraordinary influence. Her name appears on official documents. Foreign kings wrote directly to her. She had her own political connections, and her opinions shaped court decisions. Her influence didn't end when her husband died. She continued to wield power during her son's controversial reign. And we can't forget Queen Nefertari, wife of Ramses the Great. Her tomb in the Valley of the Queens is one of the most beautiful ever discovered. But she was more than a pretty face. She was educated, multilingual, and likely played a key role in diplomacy, especially with the Hittites. In a world where international relations were fragile, Nefertari's skills helped secure peace. These queens weren't silent supporters. They were key players, and their power didn't come by accident. In ancient Egypt, politics and religion were inseparable, and queens had a unique advantage. They were often seen as earthly representations of goddesses like Isis or Hathor. This gave them divine legitimacy. They weren't just rulers, they were sacred. Hatshepsut, for example, took this idea to the next level. She didn't just rule as a regent, she declared herself pharaoh. She wore the traditional kilt, the false beard, and was even depicted in statues as male. But she wasn't pretending to be a man. She was reshaping the role itself. Her reign was peaceful and prosperous. She launched massive building projects, including her stunning temple at Deir el-Bahri. She opened trade routes that brought wealth and exotic goods to Egypt. Under her rule, Egypt flourished, and yet, after her death, her name and image were chiseled out of monuments. Why? Because she broke the mold. Powerful queens were acceptable, as long as they played by the rules. But when they stepped beyond the lines, they were erased. And yet, we still remember them today. These women weren't exceptions. They were part of a long tradition of powerful queens in Egypt. Their influence is still felt today, in art, in popular culture, and in how we think about women in leadership. Consider Queen Mernith, who ruled during the First Dynasty. Her tomb at Abydos is laid out like that of a king. Archaeologists believe she may have ruled as pharaoh in her own right. That's over 5,000 years ago. Long before Cleopatra, long before Rome. Or take Queen Ankhesenamun, wife of Tutankhamun. After his sudden death, she was left in a vulnerable position. She wrote to the king of the Hittites, Egypt's enemies, asking him to send one of his sons for her to marry. That's bold. That's political strategy. It was also dangerous. The prince was murdered before he could reach her. Their stories are tragic, powerful, and often lost in the shadows of men. But when we dig them up, literally and metaphorically, we find something incredible. Proof that leadership, intelligence, and power weren't limited by gender in ancient Egypt, at least not in the way we imagine. Now imagine this: golden statues of queens standing beside gods, tombs lined with vivid paintings showing queens performing sacred rituals, jewelry made for royal women, inscribed with their names and titles, the artistry, the color, the legacy, and not just in stone. Imagine 3D reconstructions of the Temple of Hatshepsut rising out of the cliffs. Picture a digital recreation of Nefertari's tomb, her painted eyes watching as you walk through the afterlife. These aren't just stories. They're worlds waiting to be explored. With the right visuals, the past comes alive. With the right soundtrack, you feel the weight of history. And with the right voice, these women speak again. Ancient Egypt wasn't just a kingdom of kings. It was a world shaped by queens. By mothers and wives, sisters and daughters, who knew how to rule, how to survive, and how to be remembered. Their stories deserve more than footnotes. They deserve to be front and center. Watch the next video to uncover more forgotten stories from ancient history.